Supervisor Adrian Rudolph de Wet is now a state witness. When the trial resumes next week, he is expected to testify that he was forced by his boss to apprehend the two victims before they were shot, and that he was then made to throw their bodies into the pig enclosure in an apparent attempt to dispose of the evidence. If the court is satisfied with his testimony, charges against him will be dropped.
Well, we've always maintained that accused number 2 was innocent, and I think the state finally realized it, and upon consulting with him, or with our permission and obtaining his statement, they've realized that in fact he is credible and what he's saying is in fact the truth, and they have therefore agreed to withdraw the charges against him in exchange for his testimony to what happened on that tragic day.
The killings of Maria Makhatu and Kudzai Ndlovu sparked outrage in South Africa and exacerbated racial tensions. And this has led many people to ask if this incident was the first of its kind to take place at the farm, or if there's a possibility that many others suffered the same fate and that their cases were never resolved.
Welcome to This Week in Africa. Today, we talk about the breaking story of the white South African farmer who's on trial for feeding 2 black women to his pigs. Horrendous story. This is a collaborative effort between Authentic African and the Gloria Ayo, where we break down this week's breaking news and its impact on Pan-Africanism and Africa's independence. As I mentioned, today we're going to dive into this story, but before we do, we'll always start with introductions. So I'll turn it over to you, Gloria, for your intro, and then I'll do mine.
Hello again. I'm Gloria Ayo, creator of The African Story. And as always, I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you for having me again, Joe.
Of course, of
Always
course.
a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. And we are back after a week hiatus. I was traveling last week and so unable to go live, but we are back. And I am Joe Hatagwa, founder of Authentic African. The goal is to bridge the gap between Africans on the diaspora, Africans in the diaspora, and Africans on the continent. And then, of course, also with the main goal of having Africans everywhere doing one of 3 things, right? Moving, investing, and visiting the continent of Africa. So with that, we're going to jump into today's stories. As we mentioned, this was a horrendous story, and there was a lot to review. So just a little bit of background for those who maybe don't remember exactly what the story is we are talking about. So a gentleman by the name of Adrian de Wet was one of 3 men facing murder charges after 2 black women were killed at a farm and their bodies fed to pigs last year. So they're finally on trial, and we are going to review the trial details and give you some commentary on the other side. So we'll get right into it.
The decision by the prosecuting authority to withdraw charges against Adrian de Wet was made after a deal to turn him into a state witness. He was one of 3 men facing murder charges after 2 black women were killed at a farm and their bodies fed to pigs near Polokwane in South Africa's northern Limpopo province last year. The women were allegedly looking for food when the farm owner shot them dead. De Wet, who worked as a supervisor on the farm, would testify that he was forced to throw the women's bodies into the pigsty by the farm owner, BBC reported Thursday. He was released by the court Wednesday. De Wet will pin farm owner Zakaria Johannes Olivier and another farm worker who is yet to enter plea. Relatives of the dead women have expressed outrage at the prosecution's decision, calling it a denial of justice. The case has elicited uproar in South Africa, where racial tensions remain high. The white minority owns most of the private farmland in the country, where black people work low-paid jobs. The trial, which opened on Monday, is set to resume on October 6.
The trials were set to resume on October 6th. So to be clear, what we heard there is that one of the 3 accused has now turned state witness, and it looks like his charges will be, if not dropped, completely diminished because he's now a state witness. Your thoughts, Gloria?
Yeah, now this is the kind of stuff that horror movies are made of. Imagine how many of these cases go uncovered. Yet the claim of white farmers being unalived gets way more attention. And of course, we're going to have to bring that conversation up.
Mhm.
And I do appreciate the government ensuring that this case does not get fizzled out, right? Because we know of this one because of the survivor who escaped and alerted the authorities. So imagine the tons of gory stuff we're not even aware of. You know, people just disappearing, all this violence that nobody's talking about. Yet again, the claim of white genocide makes global news and even makes it to the White House. So you feed humans to pigs, then you sell those pigs to humans. So is it safe to say that there are still colonial type crimes going on in South Africa? But even the hazard, the health hazard to all, because everybody gets affected by this, or just the cannibalism of it all. Like, so you're basically recycling human beings to be eaten, consumed by other human beings. But anyway, to not only have unalived those people, but to have dehumanized them in that way shows that these people have no regard for them. They do not see them as human. And even if people are saying, oh, you know, these men are innocent until we prove otherwise, yeah, the court does have to, you know, determine the motive, to determine whether or not they're innocent. But here are some facts that we can stand on. The charges are real. The identities are real. The location, the recovery of remains at that piggery, the testimony under duress. Another fact is that this is not the first time violence on this scale on or around farms has occurred in South Africa. There have been debates of farm unalivements for many years. We can't deny the impunity around land relations. Those women must get justice. And we need Elon Musk to shed as much light around this truth. We need him to maintain the same energy with which he put out false stories about Black South Africans committing violence against white farmers. We need the White House to show these proofs, which these are tangible proofs, as opposed to the ones where it was just, you know, obviously falsified information. We need these proofs to be discussed. Justice for those women.
100%. So just to add to that, I think, you know, a couple things. Number one, you said it, right, in terms of Elon Musk keeping the same energy. For those who may need a reminder, right, there were a number of white South African, quote unquote, refugees that were offered asylum in the United States. I think it was about 65, over 60, that were offered asylum in the United States based on what they said was a genocide, a white genocide in South Africa, where what we're finding is that people of all races, mostly Africans, indigenous Africans, I should say, are the ones that are suffering the loss of life. And this is an example of something that, as you said, is probably buried and not discussed. And this is the real issue. Things like this. There should be Black South Africans offered asylum because of the genocide, or at least the unalivings that's happening of them in South Africa. And then to the other point of the person who disposed of the remains and him actually getting what seems to be, you know, his charges dropped, and then because he's becoming a state witness. Generally, you know, when you become a witness, you know, in the United States, what I'm used to is the legal system here. When you become a witness, your charges are lessened, but not if you're an accessory to the crime to that degree, right? This guy is an accessory to the crime. He's not, it's not like he saw it, knew it, and didn't say anything. He did something. Now, they say it happened under duress. He was forced to do it by his boss. But he wasn't the one who went to the authorities.
He wasn't.
Someone who escaped went to the authorities. I think if he went to the authorities, I can understand them saying, okay, he was forced to do this. He went to the authorities and said, I had to do this. But he decided to not say anything. And so in that case, I think that he is not as culpable, but he definitely he bears some responsibility. And I think I'm interested to see what they decide to do. He does happen to be the white South African of one of the white South Africans, because there's two white South Africans of the three suspects in this particular case. The third African, the indigenous African, it seems like has not put in a plea yet. So I'm wondering what the reasoning is for that, and maybe he will do so soon. But to me, I feel like the guy is getting off too easy. That's really my thought process here, and I do hope that there is justice for these two women, because this is, as you said, it's brutal, it's inhumane. The family can't even bury the remains of the people that were unalived by this farmer, which is crazy. I mean, because he literally had this other guy feed them to his pigs. Can you really just think about that? If as a family you find out that this happens to your family, and then one of the people who did it looks to be getting off and will be out in society likely at some point in time in the near future, I can't imagine what that must be like for them. Okay, so sorry, go ahead. Anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, I'm sorry. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because it really is all about self-preservation. That man he doesn't care about telling the truth. Now he's just trying to, basically get himself away from prison. He's trying to get away from the guilt, but he is very much involved. He was definitely an accessory.
Absolutely. All right. So moving on to I guess a semi-related story in terms of how the U.S. has been dealing with the continent of Africa, as always. So the U.S. imposes a $15,000, what some people are calling a poor tax, on Zambians and Malawians. So there's a new visa rules which targets Africans specifically. In this case, it's Zambia and Malawi. The State Department is proposing requiring applicants for business and tourist visas. So a tourist visa, right, which is the visa that most people apply for, right? If you want to go to Ghana as a Black American for Dirty December, you apply for a tourist visa to go to Ghana, right? So the State Department is imposing a $15,000 visa to enter the United States if you come from Malawi or Zambia. So let's get to this video and give some commentary on the other side.
The State Department is proposing requiring applicants for business and tourist visas to post a bond of up to $15,000 to enter the United States, a move that may make the process unaffordable for many. The new requirement targets many countries, including Malawi and Zambia. The department said it will start a 12-month pilot program under which people from countries deemed to have high overstay rates and deficient internal document security controls could be required to post bonds of $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 when they apply for a visa. The proposal comes as the Trump administration is tightening requirements for visa applicants. Last week, the State Department announced that many visa renewal applicants will have to submit an additional in-person interview, something that was not required in the past. The countries affected will be listed once the program takes effect. It said the bond could be waived depending on applicants' individual circumstances.
I wonder what those individual circumstances might be. Gloria, what are your thoughts on this $15,000 poor tax, as people are calling it?
Even for an American middle-class person, that is a huge ask. But I mean, to be fair, the U.S. has experimented with bond schemes before. This isn't an entirely new concept. I think in 2020, there was a similar visa bond pilot, even though because of the pandemic, that didn't get implemented. But globally, bond-based deterrents have been used by other governments to discourage visa overstays or asylum claims, especially when targeting countries with limited vetting systems and high overstay records. So they create these financial barriers, especially for citizens of lower income countries whose per capita GDP makes such bonds impractical. Yet, and this is where I have concerns, on the other hand, is a visa waiver system that is commonly granted to high-income, largely Western countries.
Mm-hmm.
The moral of the story, Africa, fix your home. Because at this point, it's not enough to blame Trump. It's not enough to blame the West. We have to just fix our home, because this is just getting so ridiculous. This is basically Trump saying, we don't want you here, so don't come here.
100%. And look, I will say that, you know, every country has its right to do whatever it wants to do when it comes to immigration and the visa process, right? The challenge that I have with the United States' approach in this particular circumstance is this country has been built on immigrants, you know, whether forced labor and or people who came under their own accord. And so in essence, I think you're forgetting who you are. This country was always called a melting pot. It was built on the backs of laborers who were not paid, right? We're talking about slaves to do much of the work that laid out the infrastructure for this country. And then beyond that, all the people who continue to build on this country happen to be immigrants.
Right.
And so, you know, and we're just talking about people who are coming to visit. Yes, maybe they have some people do overstay their visas. You know, the thing is, if somebody wants to overstay their visa, charging them $15,000 gives them more the reason to say they should overstay, you know, because they just spent $15,000, so they better stay longer, right? I mean, so I think it's just, I think the idea is just they want to just generate more revenue because they just gave more tax, gave more tax cuts to the rich, and you have to generate more revenue when you give more tax cuts to the rich because less taxes are being paid to the federal government. That's my thought. In any case, moving on to the next story, we're back, and you know what? I realized that we didn't talk about the Rwanda migrant deal. I completely missed that one, and so I do want to mention that, and we can get to that next. So Kigali has negotiated but never executed a migrant resettlement deal from the UK in 2022. And then there was one from the UN, and then the UN in Libya in 2019. But it feels like we are at a place now where the US is actually sending migrants to Rwanda. And in particular, if I'm not mistaken, the number was 250 US migrants have been agreed to be taken by Rwanda, which is unfathomable, but it looks like that's going to happen. So we're going to play this video and have some commentary on the other side.
Rwanda has formally agreed to accept up to 250 migrants deported from the United States under a bilateral initiative signed in June 2025. Rwandan spokesperson said the arrangement reflects the nation's values built on the reintegration and rehabilitation given Rwanda's history of displacement. Each deportee will be vetted before arrival and provided with workforce training, healthcare, and accommodation support to facilitate their integration into one of Africa's fastest growing economies. Washington reportedly already submitted a preliminary list of 10 individuals for approval. Deportees will only be accepted if they have completed any prison terms or have no pending criminal cases. Child sex offenders are excluded. They are not required to stay permanently in Rwanda, and the U.S. is offering undisclosed financial support to Kigali through a grant based on integration needs.
I do want to mention that the imagery that they showed there was with the former Prime Minister of the UK and Paul Kagame when they had talked about this deal in 2022 that never actually came to fruition. So just to make sure that people know that that video did not actually reflect the current discussion that is happening. That was the UK and Rwanda versus what we're talking about here, 250 migrants going to Rwanda. Now, a couple of things were mentioned in there, job training, etc. What do you think about this this taking of the migrants from the United States to Rwanda, regardless, I guess, of where they're from?
Yeah, I want to start with this comment by Pittsburgh Dude 87, who says, if he can't afford to take in migrants, how can Rwanda? Unless the U.S. is paying Rwanda, which probably costs more than just allowing the migrants to stay in the U.S. in the first place. Yes, there is some financial reward for it. There's some, oh yeah, you know, it's business too for Rwanda. We have talked about deportees being sent to South Sudan and Eswatini. We've also talked about Rwanda previously, as you referenced, negotiating a migration deal with the UK promising to process asylum seekers on behalf of Britain, but that plan collapsed into legal and public backlash. So Western governments, what we're seeing now is a trend of Western governments externalizing their asylum and deportation to countries in the global south. Yes, these countries want to limit migrant inflows, but they keep placing vulnerable people in unfamiliar environments. And yes, I call them vulnerable. I don't care if Marco wants to label them as despicable or whatever term they would like to use. They still have rights as human beings. And let's not even talk about the impact on the countries that these migrants are being sent to. Some of these countries are already trying to get it together. You're taking on migrants. How, to what extent will you be able to ensure that their rights are protected? I suspect that this deal may inspire other governments to actually propose similar third country arrangements. You're going to see what's going to happen, Joe. It's going to become a thing. Thank you.
It looks like it's already a thing, right? And you bribe them with money, right? You give them a little bit of money and they're agreeing to do it, right? Obviously, there was a financial incentive mentioned on the previous administration in the UK for Rwanda, even though it didn't come to fruition. And here it's an undisclosed amount, as was reported here. And so, yeah, there's a financial incentive for them to do it. Now, is there an incentive beyond the financial incentive for them to make sure that these people integrate into society? Because these are not all prisoners or criminals, right? In this case, we're just talking about migrants, except for child sex offenders, right? And so in that case, I'm wondering, are these people who asked for asylum in the United States from some other country, and now they've ended up in Rwanda? And so, I'm hoping that they follow the stories of these individuals and they're able to hear what happens afterwards. And so that people become more aware and then this doesn't continue to happen, because I don't think this is a great solution for anyone. Those who are the citizens of Kigali and in Rwanda, those who have sought asylum, who are in this list of migrants, neither of them win. I think it's a lose-lose situation. Okay, so moving on to the next story. We're back in South Africa, and Afrophobia is exploding in South Africa. Undocumented migrants burned alive in the latest attacks. Anti-migrant groups are blocking foreign nationals in South Africa from public health facilities, claiming they strain resources. Human rights groups say that the actions are xenophobic. We like to use the word Afrophobic because this is against other Africans. And this is now taken, and now groups have taken legal action to ensure healthcare access for all of those who are migrants in South Africa. So we will play this video and we will have some commentary on the other side.
It's 8 o'clock in the morning and members of Operation Dudula guard the Jeep clinic entrance to stop foreign nationals from getting inside. This Malawian woman, who wants to be known as Pretty, brought her 6-month-old baby for mandatory immunization but was turned away.
I'm afraid about my baby not getting immunization. What's gonna come? You see, and we don't have money to go to the private clinic because it's too much expensive.
Operation Dudula has been carrying out this campaign in different parts of the country. It was registered as a political party last year, and it says it wants all the 10 million undocumented migrants out of South African borders. But latest official statistics from 2022 show that there were nearly 4 million foreign nationals in total, regardless of legal status. The anti-immigrant group blamed them for masterminding crimes, taking their jobs, overcrowding hospitals, and stealing medication for resale in their countries.
They must go to where they belong. They not belong to South Africa. They must go, and we will make sure, as Dudula, as Operation Dudula, we can make sure that these people, they must go. They must go to their countries.
South Africa is the continent's most developed nation, and it remains a magnet for millions of African migrants. Organizations representing them say they are concerned.
You have migrants that have chronic illness who needs to be attended to. So if they then block them to get into these health facilities, there's a danger that we might lose some.
For many migrants in South Africa, hospitals and clinics have become no-go zones. Members of Operation Dudula take turns to guard entrances of these facilities, chasing away all they perceive as non-South Africans. The Department of Health denies accusations that they are colluding with Operation Dudula to conduct these illegal blockades at the entrances of public health facilities.
It's not a health issue, it's a criminal issue. You break in the law because the law of the country doesn't allow that. And anybody who breaks the law, you don't rush to the Minister of Health. You rush to ministers who are responsible for law enforcement.
But South African police are yet to respond to questions as to why they've failed to arrest members of Operation Dudula denying migrants access to health care. The movement says it plans to extend these blockades to schools and workplaces. Tuso Kumalo, Africa Matters, Johannesburg, South Africa.
So your thoughts on this, right? I mean, this Dudula group is kind of a vigilante group and now a political party blocking what they said is hospitals to begin with and moving to schools and other institutions. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, xenophobia is one thing. Administrative xenophobia is another thing. Afrophobia, I like that, you use that specific term to label it for what it is. This one is a very heartbreaking one. I mean, we touch on stories that elevate, and then we touch on some that just, are heartbreaking. But this one is really heartbreaking because I have talked about Operation Dudula before on my show, The African Story. And every single feedback I got from the South Africans who commented, every single feedback was negative. But that's not going to deter the truth from being spoken. It's heartbreaking that it's evolved. I don't even know if that's the right word to use, that it's come to this point where in 2025, you're going to generalize and hunt down foreigners. What the South Africans responsible for these atrocious acts need to understand is that perhaps you have the privilege of being a country that's advanced to the level it's advanced to. It could be another country in Africa. That's why people migrate to the West. People are just looking, for a better life. These are economic refugees. People aren't trying. Do you think it's really easy for people to be displaced from where they are rooted, where they have deep roots in these places? It could be any country that's developed to that level. It's only natural and it's a global thing. I'm not justifying illegal migration. I'm not also trying to suggest that all South Africans are this way, because I know for a fact that not all South Africans are this way. But what makes it so prominent and what makes South Africa seem to be so xenophobic is the silence from those who know that they should stand against it. When the clampdown on African businesses was happening, you saw some Black Americans stand up and say, we're not with this. What happens when there's silence? There's the impression that the entire country, that all Black South Africans support this really barbaric act. You cannot deny services, using identities and documentation as pretext, instead of you using formal legal or medical screening. This is where you hold your legislators accountable. I'm not saying that we should justify people coming into your country illegally. But you see, this whole xenophobic outbreak is actually relatively recent, because as we know, way back in the day, South Africa, and this is why people get forced to say, oh, goodness, but certain countries were there when South Africa was fighting apartheid. It's not to say, for the rest of our lives, South Africa owes us or anything like that. But this is relatively recent. I think xenophobia really started manifesting as far back as 2008. When Zimbabweans, people from Mozambique and Malawi were being attacked, and about 60 deaths at least were reported. And then you've had more throughout the years. Operation Dudula itself, I think, began about 4 years ago, and then, became a political party, ahead of last year's elections. So it's not simply xenophobia. It is a breakdown of trust in institutions, but people are channeling the desperation at, instead of channeling that at failing public services, you're taking it out on outsiders. I've said this before, some people disagreed. Migrants contribute positively to GDP. They create jobs, they fill vital labor gaps. But just targeting migrants, whether or not they're legal, only shows the deep failure. It's about the deep failure of your government, the corruption, the collapse, the unemployment, the health system collapse. But taking this out on outsiders, it's never going to resolve. Like, you're never going to resolve whatever these issues are. It's misplaced anger at this point. So I get the whole, wanting to protect your resources, but you're undermining people's rights in the process. Please, let's do better. And people should speak up. Speak up. Speak against this atrocity. South Africans, I've seen a couple come out to condemn it. We need more people to speak up against it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well put. And I'll just add that, the borders of South Africa were drawn by Europeans. In fact, the ones who are in power, the people you should be upset with that migrated there, that led to the position that you all are in as indigenous folks of that land, are the Dutch, the Afrikaners that are in your country, not the other Africans that are coming to your country. And this is the problem we have on the continent with this idea of being upset with migrants instead of being upset with the colonizers and the people who put you in the position you're in the first place. That's who you should be telling to leave the country and say, you're not welcome. You can't get healthcare here. Because those Europeans who came to the continent created the environments in which it leads to those people migrating to your country. So that's the root cause. You should be upset with them, not the migrants in your country. And by the way, your country was drawn by them who you should be upset with. South Africa, that's a concept that they created. They decided to call it that. They built it that way. You guys had tribes on land. They made it that. And so if you guys want to be upset with anybody, it should be the Dutch and the British and whoever else inhabited the lands of the continent of Africa and now split it up into what we call these 54 different countries. It's just, as you mentioned before, it's misplaced anger, and it for sure is misplaced anger. You guys are mad at the wrong people. A comment said the solution is more developed, improving the education system, training more medical professionals, economic planning to improve living standards, not denying people health care. Very well put, Pittsburgh dude 87. You see, these people born in the 80s, they have sense.
You don't know if he's born in the 80s.
It says 87.
Maybe it's his age.
Anyway, all right. So, but yeah, all good points there. Pittsburgh dude 87 for sure. I think that those are the solutions. And the government should be held accountable. Those are the things that they should be talking to the government about improving and fixing instead of being angry at the migrants who are coming across the border. Man-made borders, by the way. By not Africans. Okay.
Not Africans.
Just want to mention that again. All right. So moving on to the next story, right? So we've, this one is back to the U.S.'s involvement in Africa and how the tariffs have been destroying Lesotho's jobs. Some people estimate about 10,000 textile workers will be facing job loss and potential starvation. The closure of at least a factory and maybe more in a small southern African nation of Lesotho is in early effect, and the global disruption caused by the tariffs of the American administration really is causing havoc in the country. So we are going to watch this video and give some commentary on the other side.
Smallest countries in the world, Lesotho, is seeing the impact of tariffs already.
I think it's one of the first places where we can actually see the impact. This is a textile factory that once produced many clothes, shirts, pants for the U.S. market. This massive factory employed about 1,500 workers, and as of early July, basically all workers were laid off. Just look right here, for instance. These are sewing machines right there. So this is one assembly line of these tables. If you look here, these tables go all the way down, and then they go all the way that way. Essentially, a lot of the buyers in America who were buying from this factory, they stopped their orders because they were anticipating the impact of Trump's tariffs.
Do we know any of the brands?
Yeah, so you're familiar with this brand right here. That is a Reebok. This place is closed down right now, but there's still old orders just sitting around, orders that had already been fulfilled.
So, John, why Lesotho?
The argument that the Trump administration has made is that the trade imbalance is really huge, and that this large trade imbalance is essentially what justifies charging these high tariffs. So as Trump was doing his Liberation Day tariffs, Lesotho really got singled out for this large disparity. One of the reasons Lesotho exports so much is because it's a major textile industry that supplies a lot of major American companies with the clothing brands that they put on the shelves in the US.
How did that industry sort of develop and become what it was in Lesotho?
Yeah, interestingly enough, Katrin, it was the US that really essentially boosted Lesotho's textile industry and made it what it is today. So toward the end of Bill Clinton's second term in office, the US Congress passed a new measure called the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act. And that essentially allows certain African countries to export certain goods duty-free into the US. So get it into the US, no tariffs at all. And so one of the countries that sort of capitalized on this more than any other country was Lesotho. You saw this big textile industry sprout about 20 years or so ago.
Can you paint the picture a little bit for us of what Lesotho looked like before these tariffs were announced?
So to be clear, the economy has been struggling here for a long time. 50% of the population lives under the poverty line. Unemployment is about 30%, but essentially, if you were working in the textile industry, these were actually fairly stable jobs, even though by US standards, they wouldn't be, that high paying. I mean, they're paying under $200 a month, but for locals, that was a good salary, was a stable salary, but suddenly you lose that, and you're living sort of like hand to mouth, right? So they have to figure out how they're going to get their next meal, how they're going to pay to send their children to school. You talk to a lot of people on the ground here in Lesotho, and you're seeing that struggle, and you see it filter down, right? Because there's a big informal economy here. So even people who are not working at the textile factories, there's a lot of people that are sort of selling things on the roadside. And so I think it's not a sense that Trump's tariffs have ruined the economy here because it was already in shambles, but we can say that maybe one of the small bright spots in the economy is now in big danger.
Thoughts, Gloria?
Oh boy. So as we can see, textile manufacturing is not just like some sort of niche sector in Lesotho. It's actually the backbone of their economy. Lesotho employed around 40,000 to 50,000 workers. And this actually accounted for about 90% of its industrial exports. Now, AGOA's inception in 2000 turned Lesotho into a garment powerhouse, especially valued for global brands like Levi's, Walmart, Timberland, Reebok. So this whole thing with the tariff, once US importers heard about the tariff, because Lesotho had the highest, 50%, the reaction was immediate. I mean, it's business. It's only logical that people would react. So orders were canceled. Within weeks, entire shifts ended. Workers were sent home. And as I pointed out when we first covered this story, women actually bear the brunt of these losses because they form the bulk of the workforce in the garment industry. Washington did try to lower the tariffs. What I find, anytime we have stories like this happening, what I find concerning is how African leaders, well, in this case, Lesotho leaders, were pleading for more reduction so they could match regional competitors like Kenya and Eswatini, whose rates were lower, but it was already too late. The confidence of the buyers had already eroded. The factories remained dark. The orders were thin. Business leaders said that even the lower tariff would come too late to salvage livelihoods. So Lesotho's reliance on AGOA-fueled textile exports has been both a blessing and a curse. When this whole AGOA renewal became a political debate in Washington, its leaders, Lesotho's leaders, have always found themselves watching with anxiety. Mm-hmm. And now that fear has materialized. So again, the moral of the story, Africa, fix your home. Look for regional partners. Is it only Americans who wear clothes? It's not just only it's not only Westerners who wear clothes. It's a huge world out there. look into more partnerships. If you must go outside the continent, there are countries in the global south you could partner with. And there are things we could also do as a continent to rival even the Reeboks of this world.
Yeah, all good points, right? We need to look inward. And I'll also just mention that the idea of the tariff was to say the trade imbalance. And just to bring this point up again that we've talked about previously, the idea of a trade imbalance makes absolutely no sense. The United States is a country of 300 million people, a consumer economy. I always like to say Americans like to buy, but they don't like to be sold to. America is in a consumer economy. We buy clothes. Every person's house you walk into and you look at their closet, they have more clothes than they need, right? So the brands we just discussed that Lesotho was, manufacturing and assembling to be exported and to end up here in the United States, of course there's going to be a trade imbalance. Lesotho is never going to be able to buy as much goods from the United States as what the United States buys from Lesotho. It just doesn't make sense. Nowhere else in the world is there a consumer economy like the United States. There's nowhere else in the world. So there's always going to be a trade imbalance. The United States consumes more than they need to, right? There's so much consumer debt that has nothing to do with school or medical bills. People have debt for personal product acquisitions, right? Think about it. Most people use credit cards to buy most of the things they buy. How many iPhones are bought on credit cards? So anyway, my point is to say that this idea of this trade imbalance doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And those businesses had to do what they had to do to ensure that they didn't increase their costs for some of these products. But what that did is that completely tanked an economy in a country where, some people only had a single income household. And this was the one way that they were able to generate income. And as they mentioned, there were tertiary businesses that benefited from the fact that these factories were there. So this is unfortunate. But since the infrastructure is there, hopefully they can use that and export to other countries on the continent of Africa instead of having all your eggs in one basket with the United States, maybe then exporting to other places. Nigerians like clothes too, right? Ghanaians like clothes too. Kenyans like clothes too. So you can also ship and import those clothes to other places. So I'd like to see Lesotho just basically turn that into exporting to some of those other regions, especially since there's a bunch of stock that has already been accounted for that is not going to get shipped to the United States. You might as well find other place to get it to, and see if you can develop other trade deals to ensure that you can, get rid of some of that and also develop other clothing. Especially because I know Burkina Faso is working on manufacturing cotton and things in their own country. They may be willing to do some importing as well. So there are probably some solutions, and I hope that they do look at some of those beyond just hoping that the United States removes these tariffs, because obviously that's not going to be a solution for any long-term challenges. Okay, with that, I do want to move on to another story, and this is the final story that we're going to cover in this block. And Mali's president, Goita, has said it has foiled an alleged coup bid, arresting dozens of soldiers, including 2 generals. So the arrests come as the country's military government, led by, who I said, Assimi Goita, struggles to contain a growing insurgency by terrorist and separatist groups. Goita itself came to power through 2 successive coups in 2020 and 2021, promising to improve the security situation and restore civilian rule. Now he has extended his rule. He has dissolved some of the political parties and intensified his crackdown on dissent. So some people outside of Mali seem to take issue with that, but it feels like people in Mali do not. The security situation in some cases have deteriorated, with significant increases in attacks from groups linked to Al Qaeda and the Islamic State. I will say that there is a joint defense force that has been put together by all of the AES, and that is meant to be, pushing back on these insurgencies. So we'll see how successful they are now that they've kicked out the Western-backed powers and the Western-backed military. So we'll see if these 3 groups are able to be able to quell some of these insurgent groups. So I will get to this video and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
To Mali, where the junta has claimed to foil an alleged coup attempt. Dozens of soldiers, including 2 generals, have been arrested so far. Now, they have been accused of plotting the overthrow of the junta, which itself came to power through back-to-back coups. Now, these arrests come as the Malian army is struggling to counter terrorists and separatists. Since 2012, Mali has been racked with crises on various fronts. In 2020, the junta chief, General Assimi Goïta, took power after deposing of the then president, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Internal divisions within the new government led to a second coup in May of 2021. Now, this resulted in the accession of General Assimi Goïta to the presidency of Mali, a role that he has occupied ever since. The new military junta promised to make the situation better and pledged to return to civilian rule soon. But neither of the two ever happened. In fact, the situation has just gotten worse. In May, the junta announced the dissolution of all political parties and organizations following rare anti-government protests. Even meetings were banned. Then in July, Goïta extended his military rule for at least 5 more years without an election.
Gloria, your thoughts on the attempted coup and the subsequent comments by First Post Africa?
Yeah, what this attempt proves is that there's a lot of fracture within the government, which, as we know, as was pointed out, came in through a coup. And it's ironic that the same people who helped Goïta ascend to power are also, now trying to take him out. And for 2 high-profile figures to be detained, General Abbas Dembele, who was a former governor of the Mopti region, and another general, an Air Force general, Nema Sagara, who is actually one of the few senior female military officers in Mali, for them to be detained on the basis of them trying to destabilize Goïta's government is telling. This is actually the first time that Malian authorities have publicly cracked down on factions within their own powerful military. So again, this proves that there is some internal division, even among officers who have risen alongside Goïta. And there's a lot to look into with that, because it's one thing to have, in Traore's case, for instance, and it's not to say that there wouldn't be fractures within his own government, but his is more external, more outside of his government than in this case where it's within. So yeah, a lot of research has to be done on that.
Yeah, absolutely. There are questions to definitely ask as to why they wanted to attempt this coup, knowing that 2 coups is what led to the ascension of Goïta in the first place, and the likelihood of being able to have a coup attempt to get him out might be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And then also given his what seems to be popularity amongst the general population and the public from what we've been able to see publicly, and the cooperation between the other folks in the AES, it is something that we should be wondering about and looking into and figuring out why it is that folks that he, like you said, that rose to power with him,
Right,
are now attempting to overthrow him. As you said, it's obvious that when it comes to Burkina Faso, it's external forces. We're not really clear what forces are behind at least these folks attempting to overthrow him. There's been all kinds of conversations about, when we think about Patrice Lumumba and how he was betrayed, it was someone who was very close to him, right? And so I think that these kinds of questions do need to be asked, right? Is it an external force, or is it internal infighting because they believe they should be returning to civilian rule, which seems to be the underlying statement that is coming out of the reporting that you hear from anyone outside of the country, right? And so those questions do need to be answered, and we'll see where that goes. Okay, with that, we are now completed going through the stories for the week. There are some headlines we do want to review, and we encourage you guys all who are watching to go and do your research and pay more attention to these stories. We think they're important, so you guys should check them out. The first is about 4 of them is Kenya and the British soldiers continuing to use sex workers after being told that they are no longer allowed to do so.
Yeah, so there's been an investigation for about 2 years where now they found out that despite an official ban, some soldiers, some British soldiers continue to pay for sex with local workers. And this has actually been flagged as a breach of military protocols. So the Ministry of Defense is clamping down on this exploitation. And the story is still developing, so we'll keep our eye on it.
Absolutely. And then the next story then is the $5 million rock comet extraterrestrial projectile fell to Niger and sold at an auction in the United States, even after Mali had put a ban on after they had put a ban on exports so that they can ensure that they watch what is happening. Any thoughts on this $5 million rock? And was it Niger or Mali where it fell? Sorry,
Niger.
It was in Niger.
Yeah.
So yeah, any thoughts on this this story here?
Yeah, I like that Niger is trying to research or trying to investigate how this Martian meteorite fell on their land, but got sold at an auction in New York for $5 million. So they're suspecting that it must have been illicitly trafficked out of the country, even though there are claims of valid paperwork. So what President Yani is now doing is he's suspended all exports of meteorites, precious stones, pending a full legal review, and also citing international agreements under UNESCO conventions, which classify rare extraterrestrial finds as cultural heritage. So yeah, yay for Niger. Fight till the end.
There it is. Okay, South Africa rules that Zambian former president to be buried in Zambia and not South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Former Zambian president, President Edgar Lungu, has to be repatriated to Zambia for state burial. There's been a lot going on with him, his family, and the current Zambian president. Apparently there was a lot of friction there, and the family said, President Lungu said he must not be, the government of Zambia, the present government of Zambia must not interfere in his funeral. They don't want anything, they don't owe them anything. But now that South African court has ruled that his body must be repatriated, this overrules his family's wish to inter him in Joburg. So yeah, but the government, or rather the court, has emphasized that these state funerals carry public interest and there are protocol obligations that must be met, so they have to take the body back.
There it is. And then last but not least, this is a tragic story, and it's something that a lot of people in West Africa, specifically in Ghana, have been talking about. And there was a helicopter crash in Ghana where the defense minister and the environment minister, the helicopter crash, and they experienced loss of life along with others.
Yeah.
Thoughts on this story?
Yeah, really sad. About 8 people on a Ghana Air Force helicopter were unalived or lost their lives, and that includes, as you pointed out, the defense minister Edward Boama, the environment minister Ibrahim Murtala Mohammed, and they actually went down en route to a mining site in the Ashanti region, and again nobody made it out alive. So President Mahama has actually declared a national mourning, and he's also vowed to investigate what happened. I mean, there are rumors that you pointed out when we were talking about this, about, I don't know how true this is, but about how Mahama was actually supposed to be on that flight. We don't know, but right. They just, they definitely have to investigate it. This is just too much.
Yeah, absolutely. There are rumors that the president was supposed to be on that flight. I think that comes from local news sources reporting on the story. I've talked to people on the ground, and they're saying that this is what they understood to be the case. This is a tragic story. There was a period of mourning that the president put into place, and the country has actually really been mourning this helicopter crash. It actually is really taken all of the country by surprise, and it seems like very many people in the country are affected by this particular crash. Look, our thoughts and prayers are with those families of those who lost those lives. And and I think the black boxes were recovered, so they are doing an investigation to see what exactly happened. There's all kinds of speculation if the president was supposed to be on there, what could have been the reason for it, et cetera, et cetera. We won't talk about the speculation, but as more details come out, we will definitely bring those to you. And with that, for the first time ever, we are under time, or right at time. So any final thoughts before we go?
Oh, no, just thank you all for tuning in. Please I nearly said reshare, repost, retweet, put our videos out there, like, comment. These things go a long way in just helping us get the audience, But we do appreciate you tuning in, especially those who keep coming back. We appreciate you. And if you have any suggestion, please keep commenting. Let this live keep going. Thank you all so much, and see you next time.
Absolutely. And I would just say thanks for everybody who watched all the way through, those who were who stayed involved in the commentary. I think we love that you guys are engaged in the conversation, and as much as possible we'll try our best to put your comments on the screen and address them. But yes, thanks again. Make sure you do all the things that Gloria mentioned, and we will see you guys all next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.